Hey folks, David Stewart here. As requested, a little bit of a record review. Here it is, The Forest Seasons by Wintersun. And since it's called The Forest Seasons, I thought I might go ahead and record it outside in my own weird little forest, a few trees, maples, and that sort of stuff on a nice hot Modesto night. So forgive me if I'm sweating a bit. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a preamble to this album, The Forest Seasons. This is the third album by Finnish metal band Wintersun. We didn't get Time 2 this time around. We got a brand new, different kind of album called The Forest Seasons. The preamble is this. Your enjoyment of this album will be, to a great extent, contingent on your expectations going into it. And I don't mean high or low expectations, like you're expecting a good album or a bad album, but expectations in the context of what Wintersun has released in the past. If you're one of those fans that really loved the first album, and of course I really loved the first Wintersun album, it's one of my favorite albums, and you really want Wintersun to do more music like what you heard on that first album, you are going to be sorely disappointed. The new Wintersun album, The Forest Seasons, is not going to meet those expectations. But if you are like me and you listen to a lot of different kinds of metal from a lot of different kinds of genres, both extreme and not extreme, then I think, and you come in with an open mind, what you want is to experience good music in the metal genre, or just good music, period, then I think The Forest Seasons will deliver on those expectations. It depends on how open you are to be willing to hear something called Wintersun that sounds very different from what you've heard from Wintersun in the past. And that plays a big part, because sometimes you're not going to want to buy an album that doesn't exactly meet what you want. When you pick up an Emperor album, you want it to sound like Emperor. You don't want it to sound like something else. And maybe when you pick up a Wintersun album, you want it to sound like what you imagine Wintersun to be, and not like what this ends up sounding like, which is a lot of different things. And I'll get into that with the analysis. So there's my preamble. Let's talk about what's in the album. So overall, I do like the album a lot. It gets a big thumbs up from me, and I do recommend you buy it if you are into extreme metal, and are especially if you like old school black metal, because there's a lot of flavors like that on this album. Then I think that you're going to like it. What we have on the album is we have 4 songs, only 4, but 4 Wintersun songs are basically the equivalent of like 8 or 10 songs from another band, because they're very long and very complex. So the value, I think, is there even with the 4 songs. They're all over 10 minutes. The longest one, I think, is 1441, the first song. And then there's a couple, all of them are over 12 minutes, actually. So they're all pretty good. This is a double LP. I got the Splatter Disc vinyl, which is a U.S. exclusive. Ooh, so cool, you know. And I do like the vinyls. And there's 2 vinyls. Each side of each vinyl is 1 song. Wow, that's pretty cool. That's how epic this particular piece of metal happens to be. On the 4 tracks, and I'm just going to break down a little bit of what you can expect from each of the 4 tracks. Starts off with Awaken from the Dark Slumber, and the entire album concept is built around this progression of seasons, like Vivaldi's 4 seasons. So it starts with spring, and then ends with winter. And so our first song is called Awaken from the Dark Slumber, Spring, and there's 2 parts to it, the Dark Slumber and the Awakening. And it really does sound like an awakening. It starts off with like some forest noises, and you might hear crickets in the background in my video here. And then it progresses into, it opens with these huge sort of banging, big, wide open guitar chords with this like floating sort of couple of polyphonic synth melodies on top of that. And it's a really huge texture that we've actually never heard on a Wintersun album before. So that right there, along with some very slow to mid-tempo drumming underneath it with simple bass drums and that sort of stuff. So if you are not open to that texture right off the bat might put a couple Wintersun fans off. But I like that. To me, it sounds like a classic Burzum, or maybe even maybe slower Emperor riffs with a bunch of synth on top to sort of liven it up and give it like this extra rich sort of atmosphere. Overall, this is a much more atmospheric Wintersun album than what you've gotten in the past. So keep that in mind, and that's why it sounds like so much like black metal to me. So it starts off with this big black metal sound. It kind of reminds me, like I said, of Burzum. It kind of reminds me of some textures I've heard in a number of doom bands. kind of mixed together. The drums are simple because it's an awakening. So it starts off with a slower tempo. Then when we get to the second half of the song, the tempo really picks up and it's very, very fast. And you have some folk style singing and some folk melodies that really liven things up, and some really, really cool riffs that are very catchy and very well performed, and very much, I think, fit into that first Wintersun album sound. That, like, those crazy riffs and the syncopations and all that kind of stuff that happens on the second part of the song. The next song, which was called the Forest That Weeps, that's Summer. It's all one big track. I think that one is probably the most classic Wintersun sounding song on the album. It has some great choirs that end at the end with a bunch of, if you saw some of the videos of Jari making them, it has a bunch of familiar European metal musicians on it, and I think it's a pretty effective, fun song. It has like that classic folky Wintersun feel, along with like lots of complicated guitar riffs and some cool synth melodies on top of that as well. This is actually the most synth heavy Wintersun album yet. It's even, to me, it's even more synth heavy than Time One, but in a different direction, more as part of the atmosphere and the layering. There's a lot more vertical textures in this, big sounding guitar chords that filled up the space along with synth, rather than having a riff and then having a synth melody on top. The riff would just use a couple of strings on the guitar to produce a really easily understood melody. These are just big chords, big sounds of textures, big texture scapes, in a sense, in places in the song. Anyway, moving on. Third song is a 4-movement song, Eternal Darkness, Autumn, and it kind of falls into a somewhat symphonic pattern with its four movements. And in the fourth movement, you have a recap of material from the first movement, and I think it's pretty effective. This third one, to me, sounds a lot like Emperor, and it reminds me a lot like Emperor. The vocals, to me, or maybe Kerk Angren. So like maybe a fusion of those two things, the Dutch black metal band Kerk Angren, and then of course classic Norwegian Emperor. Very, very harsh, big guitar sounds coming out, synth on top, extremely fast drums, really, really harsh vocal sounds, and a really, really just epic sounding big textures going throughout the entire thing. And then it ends with this like sudden cutoff, like a song from maybe Pure Holocaust by Immortal. So it to me, it sounds very referential of classic black metal, but of course with that like little Wintersun twist with the synths and some of the catchy riffs along in there as well. So I thought that one was really, really like a powerful song for me, because I really like that classic black metal song, black metal sound. And of course, Loneliness Winter is the final song. And I gotta say that that's probably the best song on the album, and is immediately one of my favorite Wintersun songs. It really stands out, and it really is a beautiful way to end this with, if you want to imagine within the Wintersun catalog something like Sadness and Hate off the first album. It's like that, but way more beautiful, much more synth, much more competency with the composition elements to produce a really, really great effect. And Jari's vocal ability in that song is really on display. He sounds better than he's ever sounded as far as his vocals go, and I think that's a good thing. So that's the breakdown of the songs. Now, I'm going to talk about 4 things as part of my analysis: performance, composition, production, general effect. Now, before I talk about any of these, because this is relevant, I need to point out a couple things about the album that probably a lot of people don't know unless they buy the booklet. This is actually a Jari Mempaa solo album, even though it says Wintersun. Kai Hato isn't even on this album. The drums are programmed, and that's going to come into play when I talk about this in just a minute. So the drums are actually programmed, which is a little bit weird, and the other guys in the band aren't on it. Jari recorded this, I guess, totally on his own in like his apartment, and then had a couple of the other guys come in and do some extra vocals, and I think that was pretty much it. So when I talk about performances, I'm really just talking about Jari. Now, what makes this extra weird, and I'll talk about this with, I guess, at the end, is that there's all these things featuring all the band members with these like little photo things that Kai did, or that not Kai, that Jari did on his own, like learning how to do Photoshop and how to be a photographer. It seems weird that like the band is so included when they're not even really on the album. Anyway, let's talk about first performances. The performances, if I'm going to give this like a 1 to 10 rating on performance, I'm actually going to give it an 8, not a 10. The guitar is great. The guitar sounds amazing. I love Yari's guitar performances. They sound great, and I think the bass sounds good. I think Yari's vocals sound better than they've ever sounded before. Both the harsh vocals and the clean vocals, they sound really good. I think he did a great job on this and really stepped up his game. However, the programmed drums, the drums on the album, to me are a big step down from Kai Hato, and this has to do with the expectations that I talked about before. For any other metal band, I wouldn't have pointed out the drums as like a weak point of the performance. But because I have not just something else in reference that is Kai Hato, and Kai Hato is an amazing drummer, but I have Wintersun albums with Kai Hato on them, I'm aware of his absence. There's all kinds of extra little fills and little things that he does as a drummer that add a lot to Wintersun. And though the programmed drums are good, and they're as good as most drummers I would expect on a metal album, there's just that extra little missing piece of the interest in the drums that we're used to on a Wintersun album. So I'm going to knock it down a couple points for that. And then also the bass parts are just, they're not really featured, so they're not good or bad. And you should know that. But otherwise, it's really good. So the performances overall are good. The synth doesn't do anything too complicated, but it's performed well. So overall, I'd probably say 8 out of 10 on the performance because the drums don't quite equal the excellence of all the other instruments. Composition. So the composition elements on this are really good. I'm going to give them a 9 out of 10. Each song on here, I think, has its own character, its own movement. After I gave them a couple listens, the first and third songs are the least accessible of them, but after listening to them multiple times, I think that they are really, really, really good. And they're just something that's not typical and doesn't meet expectations going into it that well, but they're really, really well done. I think Yari's improved as a composer, not in the individual little pieces of material that he puts together, but in the way he constructs the entire thing. And then not just the entire song, but in the entire album. This is a concept album, so the concept's really followed from beginning to end in a full, complete way. And I don't think the individual songs suffer as a result of that adherence to the concept, which I think a lot of concept albums, sometimes individual songs will suffer for the intent of the concept, and I don't think that's happening in this one. Yari was able to, arrange all of his material in a way that each song has its own life, and each song is good for itself as well. So composition's 9 out of 10. The only reason I wouldn't say it's 10 out of 10 is that, there's just a couple places in various compositions where I'm not feeling particularly moved. It's not that they're bad or badly done. It's just that they don't move me quite as well as the other ones. The transitions are all really well done. So overall, 9 out of 10 for the composition. Very well done. The production, I'd also put actually at a 9 out of 10, though I did mention programmed drums. Depending on the version of the album you get, you're going to experience the production a little bit differently. I listened to the 24-bit high-quality WAV files, and those sound really good through like my studio monitors in my studio space with like my hearing aid on and all that kind of stuff. The vinyl, however, I think sounds even better, and the reason is just because vinyl, even though it's a lower fidelity, much lower fidelity than the 24-bit WAV files, even though it's a lower fidelity, it produces a warmer sound by thinning out a lot of sort of sometimes harsh sounds, especially up in the upper register. So I actually like the vinyl a lot better. I thought the instruments overall, I could hear them better on the vinyl mix than I could in the 24-bit mix. But then if you happen to get the Forest package, there's probably going to be a bunch of different fan mixes coming out there that'll put things at different levels. The reason the production's not 10 out of 10 would be that the drum sounds, in some cases the bass drum's a little too high in the mix. The drum sounds aren't quite perfect, and in some cases the guitar is mixed in a way that you can't clearly hear what it's doing in the third track. So that's why I would ding it a point. Otherwise, I think the production's actually really good. The rhythm guitars sound great. They sound, I don't know if he used a software amp or not, but they sound really good. It sounds like my Mesa Boogie upstairs, so it sounds like an amp that I'm really used to playing on, which is great. And the bass is nice and clear. The vocals sound really good. They're really well put in the mix, all of the vocals. So overall, I think the production's really good. Everything's nice and clear and easily heard, even with the final mix. And then there's going to be band mixes, which are going to deliver to you even more possibilities with the mix. Lastly, general effect. So last category is general effect. I'd say the general effect on this is a 9 out of 10. And that's because of that concept. That adherence to the concept is really good. The packaging kind of adds into the general effect of it. You know, it's got this sort of forest scene, which is kind of, to me, actually seems very Wintersun. Kind of reminds me of the first album, and I guess the second album too. And you have these sort of portraits of the band members, and these, however, I don't think look. Maybe they look okay on your screen, but when I'm looking at them up close, and especially if I'm looking at the like digital booklet, I don't really get them. I don't think that they really add in. I think that they're just not as good as, I probably wouldn't have included them. I would have had something else to do. And I do my own book design, so I think about this stuff from time to time. So the packaging's okay, not great, probably not as good as Jari hoped it would be. But our first time doing something and stepping into a new field, you're not always going to be as good at it as the follow-up. So seeing the skills that he's displayed in sort of designing all of the materials, I think the next set of materials he designs will actually be really good. Now, I will say also that I like the vinyl design much better than the 5K booklet. The vinyl design has all the words in this nice little orange font here with, you know, the band members' faces kind of in the background there. And the orange font's really easy to read the words. Whereas the 5K booklet, they're white words, and Jari relied on drop shadows to make the words visible over certain pieces of art. And I've done that, and I've done it on book covers before. It just doesn't look that good. It's not that easy on the eyes. What you want is things that have natural high contrast. So I know that probably doesn't matter to a lot of people, but sometimes when you open up like a big vinyl and you see how things look, it can make an impression on you. I gave a review of Twilight Force last year, and those materials were like 11 out of 10. The packaging that came with it set the mood for what you were going to expect, and when you put it on, you were excited to hear the music. Not quite as much with this, so I got to ding it a little bit for the general effect. But the music itself is good. I think it works as a concept. I don't think, if I were to put it, it's the worst Wintersun album, right? I don't like it as much as Time One in terms of that general effect, but it still has a really good general effect, and the songs don't flow into each other as much as those other albums, but that's okay. It's okay for each of the songs to have an individual life, and I feel like I'm sort of progressing through the four seasons. You're sort of waking up with the first one. It slowly builds up to this big epic sound, and then the third one's really aggressive, intense, and then the fourth one's just the release of all that. It's reflection afterwards. So overall, I like it. I do recommend it. Expectations will play a part in this for you, but I expect to be listening to this for many months to come and enjoying it. My overall recommendation, if I were to give it a numerical score, because people like numerical scores, I give it a 9 out of 10. I think it hits all the right points. If you were to compare it to, like, I don't know, modern popular metal, then it'd be like a 12 out of 10. It's just most good stuff people don't know about, and it so far surpasses, like, say, you know, Metallica's last album. It's not even like worth comparing the two. So that's another part of expectations. It's a 9 out of 10 as like a great metal album. But if we put it in context with like other metal acts, it's so much better. It's not even funny to me when I think about it from that sort of angle, depending on how you want to compare it. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. I know this is kind of a long analysis, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see and what you want to hear in the future. All my books, the links for them are available down below. Prophet of the Godseed, my sci-fi novel, will be available free for a limited time, as will Yarmish and the Farmer, so check those out down below. And as always, if you choose to buy one of my books, a review is most helpful. Lastly, there will be a little bit of a book giveaway, so check the comments for that. The book, it will be a book written by a friend of mine, my brother-in-law actually, in a massive bit of what do we call it? Nepotism. I'm going to give away a couple of copies of his book. It's called Immortal Fear. It is a urban fantasy book, and I think it's actually pretty cool. So maybe you'll like it too. Get a chance to grab a free book. I'll see you next time, and happy listening.